Hello, I'm James Warren.
And I'm Andy Cushen.
And this is the Denver Urbanism Podcast, a podcast on all things city building in the influential city of Denver. Today, dear listener, we have a very special treat for you. We are joined by none other than Alan Fisher. Alan is a content creator around urbanist concepts. And Alan, I'll let you introduce yourself. Talk to the listener for people who may not know who you are and what you do. Let our listeners know what that is.
Yeah, so I'm most notably from the East Coast, or the Northeast specifically. So a lot of my concepts and ideas come from the fact that I live there. But for the most part, all my content generally revolves around a mixture of urban planning, transit, rail, and a mixture of stuff in between. For the most part, it's very random what exactly I pick on the projects to work on, or it's like if I traveled somewhere or really care about something, or maybe even like I got invited out to go to an event for either like a rail thing or startup or etc. There's just a lot of very cool topics that I can cover, and I think the problem is that not all of them are very like clickable or very like mainstream topics that people necessarily would get mass appeal, but that's not what I'm going for. Some urbanists are definitely going for the more mass appeal of certain things. I really don't care a lot of times. But it's interesting when a video does blow up and I didn't expect it to.
Well, as folks who host a show called Denver Urbanism, we can understand what it's like to cover niche topics.
Very niche. I think we still did a good job on that episode about the sound ordinance. My mom texted me recently and said, I'm listening to your podcast. I said, you really do not need to. Like, you really do not at all. I don't actually know this, Alan. What was the sort of thing that originally got you going in terms of like, I'm going to record something, I'm going to post it somewhere public? Like, what was the initial topic or initial drive?
So this kind of dates back to when I was a kid. There are, I guess, two things when I was a kid. My mom would always tell me, we lived in this certain town in South Jersey called Pittman, and I guess Pittman and Glassboro, kind of in between the two. And she was always like, we live here and not in this other town called Mullica Hill in one of those developments, because I can walk on the sidewalk down the street into the town. Like, we live here, I don't want to live in that other one. So my mom always had like that in the back of my head. And I think I had an unusual childhood compared to a lot of Americans, because for 4th through 6th grade and all of high school, I walked to school. Which is unusual if you're in a suburb specifically. Yeah. And then also because I was a dork and there's a train that ran through our town, so generally I had an appreciation of trains. I didn't really look much into them besides like appreciate the fact that it was there and maybe know a bit of the history of it. But eventually that culminated in later in college, I was really, really bored and fed up of engineering stuff. So I just wanted something else to dig into. And that ended up manifesting when I had a surgery in like 2018. I had a ton of time to do nothing, and I usually did video editing for like other things, and now I had to sit at home sort of during recovery, and I didn't have much to do. So I was like, why don't I make a video about something that I've been reading and watching a lot about, which is like urban planning content and stuff like that. And so in 2018, I think I made 3 videos, and those kind of sat there for about a year. One of them got a little bit popular, which it was like light rail versus bus rapid transit. That was one of the first ones that got popular. And a year goes past and I'm still in school and everything. And some guy emails me. It literally said like armchair urbanist fan mail. And I felt bad because I was like, well, I wanted to make more of these, but now this is just like the cherry on top of like, I need to finish another one eventually. Mm-hmm. And then I was writing it and editing it, and then finally March of 2020 came around and everyone was stuck inside and had nothing to do. So then I was like, okay, I need something to distract me from finishing the online classes and everything. So once a month I was like, I'll make one video at least and see where this goes. And I never had like the one video or anything that like exploded my channel. It sort of just grew over time very slowly. There was like 1 or 2 that kind of blew up in a way where I didn't expect, because that was like, the topic is very niche, no one's going to watch this. There was one about canals in New Jersey, and there was another about Chicago's commuter rail system, Metra, which I was like, no one's going to watch this, but it's one of my most popular on my channel.
It's the 3rd biggest city in the country. You got to assume some of them care,
Yeah, well, I think, and this goes with kind of being a creator about these topics. None of us will admit this stuff, but this stuff is legitimately boring.
Yeah, right. Yeah, fair enough.
And the hard part is making it interesting to a general audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And like, I think I always look back to that Metro video that I did Specifically, I did the intro like it's a radio broadcast, but like over the top, like rock music.
Yeah.
Hey, it's 95.7 The Deep Dish, coming at you live from top of the hour, but bottom of the red line. We got the music for you coming from the center of the Midwest, starting off with some local Chicago music, but in a few minutes we're giving away year-long passes to Metra. And I think that intro was so ridiculous that it propelled people to watch the rest of the video because it added context to, hey, here's Chicago stuff, here's the era that we're talking about, and et cetera, et cetera. And then I went into the rest of the video, which is very like dry train stuff. But it's the fact that you get people's attention and sort of get them interested in a topic that they would have otherwise not cared about.
Mm-hmm. I've been watching your videos for years, and a lot of the stuff is not necessarily hyper relevant to Denver, but I'm still watching because I think that there's a lot of concepts that I have found valuable in your videos and have found educational. You know, you're creating these topics and you're trying to create them to be specific enough to cover a specific topic, but broad enough that general people can understand them. What do you want your audience to do with that information?
I think that there's a lot of creators that put out their stuff into the void and just assume like, oh, people are going to watch this, it's entertaining, and they might get some information out of it. But I've had a lot of people that contact me later on and be like, because of your stuff, I went to like town hall meeting, or I've gotten involved locally or something, or I even moved to a city because you talked about it in a certain way and I like the aspects of it. The amount of people I've met in Philly, because once in a while I'll walk around and I'll just get recognized. The people will once in a while come up to me and say like, I moved to Philly or I moved to the Northeast or somewhere because I saw your stuff and was like really impressed that any of this exists. Because I think that's a lot of things, is that unless you're super ingrained in these topics, no one knows that certain things exist. Like I guarantee about Denver specifically, I guarantee that no one knows that there's other rail lines other than the one that goes to the airport for some people. Like, because we have to like imagine the average person's experience with trains. There's not much that they know, except for I get stuck at the grade crossing once in a while in traffic.
Right.
And then I have to remember, how do I relate to that person? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned this, yesterday. You were talking about the history of railroad. It's like actually like deeply important to the legal foundations of a lot of our laws. Denver was founded and only really took off because it wasn't founded around the railroad. There wasn't a railroad here, and that almost killed us. Then we paid a lot of money. The citizens all raised a bunch of money in a big Music Man style spree to bring the railroad down. And then that's why the city persisted and is still the case. And I didn't know. There was a recent video from, I think it was City Beautiful, about like Dallas. Like, well, why is Dallas there? Well, the railroad again. So, there's those sort of origins of railroad. But then there's also just the fact that you're right. Like, people just experience that, like, waiting at the crossing in the middle of your town. I grew up in Southern Maryland. There was, like, a freight rail, like, track that went right through the center of our town. And that was the most I ever basically thought about trains. Until, then you move someplace with trains. And, that first basic curiosity you have, is like, how did this happen? And then from there, you start realizing, like, oh, there's actually different ways it could have happened. We could have had more. We could have had less. We could have had a different style train. You had your video about Denver maybe a year ago or something like that. And, the thing that you took time to compliment there is like, wow, it's like a fully electrified commuter rail system. That's like pretty crazy. And I just had totally taken that for granted. Like, of course it's electrified. Why would they do anything else? It would be stinky otherwise. I don't know what I thought. Right. But it takes that person then, even to your point, it could be a little bit boring, but it's like, let me slam it in your face. This stuff matters, and here's how or why. Your editing style is punchy in that way, too, of just kind of being, you're kind of funny in your editing style, as I'm sure you know already, but maybe it's the sort of cuspy millennial and Gen Z, like, sense of humor about, like, smash cut and, you know what I mean, like, clip art and stuff like that. Yeah. I don't know.
I just always think of when I'm watching other content with people that necessarily kind of dwell on things, I always think of the Monty Python thing. Get on with it.
Like, yeah.
I know this already. You just tell me the thing. There's various reasons why people do that. People dwell and purposely stretch out content because they know if they hit a certain mark, they'll make more money, etc. online. Right. And that's like frustrating, even though I shoot myself in the foot because I never optimize my content to do any of that.
Right.
So I could make probably a decent amount of more money, but don't, because I'm like, I would hate myself if my content looked like that or sounded or like was edited like that. And I appreciate that a lot of the people that watch my stuff, they have a little bit of knowledge going into it usually, and so I can usually avoid talking or doing the whole spiel or doing like a whole 101 lecture before I go into things. Some of my videos I will explain like everything from the base inception of the concept to the whole like actual complexities, but there's other videos which I don't care. And I think there's some creators that their videos are dragged out to like 45, 50 minutes. And it's like, you could probably do the same thing in like 15 or 20, but they often just reiterate topics over and over and over. And it's like, there are some people that need that, but there's also the other type that don't at all. And I appreciate that.
I think that maybe is part of like the key for some of your success, right? Is that you're appealing to an audience who can get things on the first pass and doesn't need you to do a 50-minute video when you could do a 7-minute video. And I certainly don't want to sit around for 50 minutes of my day watching a video that could be explained in, a fourth of the time or something like that.
Yeah.
We've talked a little bit about your perspective on your channel as advocacy. And I think that that's really valuable and probably shapes the fact that you don't stretch on your videos, because your fundamental goal isn't necessarily about making money. It's about trying to change the status quo. And remember, there's this other YouTube channel, Not Just Bikes. I remember seeing a tweet of theirs back in the day that was like, my channel's not advocacy. I'm just talking about how great the Netherlands is. And I remember just being like, this is such BS. You're like doing all this education on your channel, and then people view it as advocacy, but you're saying it's not because you don't want to be wrapped into people trying to better their communities. You just want them to, all the rich people to pick up and move to somewhere better. And to me, that's anywhere can be better. Anywhere has problems. And the places that are the best because a bunch of people buckled down and fixed those problems. So my question to you is, how do you see your videos as advocacy, and what do you do in your videos to live out that purpose?
Yeah, so I don't like being negative usually. Like, obviously, it's really fun to be a critic, and it's really fun to be a hater. But at the end of the day, that is a very hollow thing if you cannot then suggest things to then fix. Or if I'm talking about a specific person, maybe they screwed up something, I can suggest, hey, here's how you can do your stuff better to, in the future, not make the same mistakes. And I really am frustrated by a lot of, I call them infographic channels, or they're very like centrist infographic channels on YouTube that cover generalist topics. And it's basically a Wikipedia read where there's no technically political angle or ideology, but if you dig a little bit into what they're saying, there is actually an ideology that they just believe in the status quo generally. And that's like frustrating to me, because there is actual opinions usually if you care about the topic. And it's one of those things where if you watch it and you know what they're talking about, you already see where they're going, and you don't like that sometimes. And so what I try to do is I try to either leave an opinion or angle or something that people could go into that's very optimistic, where they can try to get involved in something, or I leave them with an angle that they've never thought about before. And now it's an interesting topic to maybe attack an argument with that someone would not expect. I think one of the most successful videos on my channel is the one that talks about electric cars. Because in that video, I say that electric cars are better than gas cars, but the problem is that they're still cars.
Right.
And this is one of the first videos that ever talked about that concept in general, and it got really popular because of it. And a lot of people messaged me and they were like, I never thought of this before. And because the video is framed as a electric versus gas car video, because most people will click on that because they're either like, oh, electric cars suck, or they're the other one where it'd be like, why would he be defending gas cars or something like that? But no, the actual video is that, no, I just hate cars in general because they are the problem generally. And it's like, yeah, there's usefulness in certain aspects of them, but for the most part, we shouldn't be building stuff around them in general. You can get someone interested because there's a normal topic that they're convinced about, and then you change the argument to be something completely different, and that changes a lot of people's minds, I find.
And to that point, I mean, I think the baked in kind of pro status quo bias, I think that's what I'm really enjoying and finding difficult, in myself. I'm the type of person, I like to just know why something is. That is the motivated question for me. And I don't believe that other people, that I should wait for other people to explain it to me. I'm going to go and I'm going to find out how the zoning code works and why that shaped a building to be the way it is shaped in the city and county of Denver. And that's just sort of how I move through the world. But I then have to engage that other part of my brain, that is the harder part of my brain, and say does it need to look like this? What would it be if it was to change? And the press isn't going to do that. That's not like their role is to say, how could it be better? Because the point is sort of taking out any sort of point of view and just reporting facts. So there needs to always be then this kind of like second tier of people who are engaged, people who care about the sort of news and politics in a given place, in a given city, and then actually have a point of view on it. Like, hey, we've been saying for 50 years in Denver, for instance, that we shouldn't have cars in parks on Sundays. Why has no political leader ever gotten that done? Why? After 50 years of that. And like, you could write the news article that is like, 50 years of campaign pledges. You then don't necessarily say in that piece, like, here's why it's actually good to get the cars out of the thing. You can only do it with quotes. You can only do it in some sort of way. So the point of view and the honesty that you have about your point of view on it is refreshing as well. As opposed to, my favorite of the videos you've done is you kind of coached OBF on this like Grid Cities video or whatever. And this was like prior to me knowing your content is anything involving trains. And I just thought like, oh, I appreciate that the guy's like an honest media critic, about like how to produce something that is not copying. Yeah. And it's relevant. I mean, the grid question, right? Like, I clicked on his original video because Denver's a grid city. We're on a list of very, very grid cities. When you look at the most orderly cities, like, we're up there. So, like, of course you're going to sort of click on the thing that relates to you, but you shouldn't just then sort of be fed, here's why. The what comes next or what could be better is really the question that like all of us who like live in a place and are engaged in some way politically, like kind of just also have to engage with. We can't be lazy about that.
Yeah. And there's certain topics that I find people lock into a certain side of it when they know that the argument is coming. Mm-hmm. And so like the electric versus gas cars, it's like you have to find a way to present an alternate solution or just opinion. And then people suddenly will get like out of their confrontational mode and be like, oh, what are you talking about? Obviously, the hardest one, I think, in general, is imagine a Renaissance painting of Dante's Inferno and it says housing politics. Yeah. That is one of the ones that's the hardest to talk about because there's people that have very, very solid opinions about, hey, this new apartment building's going up and it looks new. And so I don't like it because that means the rich people are moving here and housing prices are going up. There's so many more layers to that and so many more reasons why housing prices are going up other than just building. And it's so hard to explain to people those layers without them locking down and just being like, no, you're a developer shill or something like that. And so you need to somehow approach arguments in like a way that, or not even an argument, just discussion in a way that people are not expecting an angle to come, for you to come from a certain angle. And they then will shut up or just try to listen because they've never heard that before. And so I try to put into certain video content stuff, along with being like not centrist or status quo. It's just, you have to come at an angle that people aren't used to so they don't immediately shut your opinion out. So that's
or incorporate it into the sort of index cards of every video that could sort of address the same topic.
You don't just move the conversation forward on your channel. You do that, and I think you do that pretty effectively. But I think one other reason that I really appreciate your channel is that you make pretty specific plugs for getting engaged from an advocacy perspective. So when you did the one on Denver, I remember you mentioning the Park Hill Golf Course redevelopment and about how we had this upcoming ballot initiative and to vote to have this defunct golf course developed into apartments and open space. Now, that didn't happen here, so the juggernaut that is the Alan Fisher, YouTube channel didn't sway that one. But have you seen your advocacy through your channel have some real-world successes?
I would say the main thing is that if you catch a certain thing early enough, you can then plant a seed that then spreads into other opinions. And they might not all be based off of your video, but they're based off of then hearsay that the opinion was planted with.
Right.
And the hardest part with me is picking up a topic early enough that I know it's going to be a big issue and then making a video about it, which is difficult because when you pick it up early, there's not much context about it because no one's written anything or done videos or done opinion pieces, et cetera, et cetera. So it's hard. Like one of the ones that like I would say I screwed up on was the city of Cincinnati owned a railway line that it's a really complex topic, but essentially they own the property of the railroad because they built it back in the 1800s and then they leased it out to Norfolk Southern. And I picked that up about a month before, or I put the video out a month before the vote happened. And I really think that if I was like 6 or 8 months before, it would have had a bigger impact because you would plant the seed, and not necessarily everyone would watch the video, but you would plant the seed and the advocates that know about it can then spread it.
Yeah.
So there are certain topics I would say that like I've definitely helped with, like the bike lane one in Philly that like we talked about. And there's also other things that generally if an opinion gets out there and it's an opinion that no one's heard before and it's in a video that's popular, then that opinion will sort of spread. Like there's a few definitely Amtrak related ones that I've like talked about that it won't necessarily be my thing that sparked it, but I knew like a general discussion within a small group and then brought that discussion out into the public. Yeah. And now it's not necessarily my opinion or thing, but it's the thing that was in a small group that is now the average person or the person at least that's aware of these things is aware of this bigger topic now. And I think the Amtrak one that I always point to is the problems with the second generation Acela sets that are currently sitting in the yard at Philly, and they're trying to get them operating this year, hopefully. But they were supposed to be operating back in 2021. So that's one of the issues, for example.
Yeah, well.
And infrastructure is that way where, like, you talk about the bridge for 30 years. You talk about the Hudson River for, like, 50 years or whatever. You talk about a given tunnel through the mountains and, you know, the 99-year lease on it. Many years, you can know those things are coming.
Yeah.
And you're right, they're boring. I mean, you know, like, hey guys, imagine this tunnel, imagine this river, imagine this crossing. Like, at its core, it is the type of thing that most people just don't even perceive. They take it for granted. But if you then get people engaged with, we could do something different here. It doesn't need to be rebuilding a 6-lane highway. It actually could be a different thing that we put there. When you engage with that early enough, you're right. I mean, it really does plant the seed of just asking people to then, you know, causing people to ask questions.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times, like, public processes basically go on as like a, you know, a bit of a cherry on top. Like, okay, yeah, like, well, we already did the alternatives analysis, and so there's really nothing else to do here, but just, like, go forward with the sort of selected alternative that we said in our federal thing. And then, like, regular people can say, but wait a minute. We have been saying for 30 years on this block, we don't want this, like, strip of parking here, you know, because of XYZ. It causes a problem in front of the daycare, whatever. Name your problem. People know things. And when you can activate them, that this is their opportunity to get involved, it can be really powerful. Not just in all the NIMBY ways. Like, I mean, people, I think, generally want things better. When I'm an optimist, I think that people generally want things better. We all just sort of grapple with the definition of better and, you know, like, fight about what that might be. But, you know, I mean, that's what you're doing, is you're activating people in that way.
I think the thing that advocates need to realize a lot of times is that oftentimes, even though you see a singular politician or singular head of a group as an issue, you have to remember that they're not usually the ones that do the work. Most state DOTs, for example, they're all made of people. And those people have opinions that can be swayed, especially if they're like a younger person that is just joining the agency or something. They're the ones doing the actual work and making the like, hey, maybe we shouldn't do that. Or, hey, I'm going to alter the design slightly because I know in the back of my head we shouldn't probably be like adding another lane, for example, or something. And I think the thing that is really interesting within the last like 5 or 10 years is a lot of the advocacy that people are doing urban planning wise is getting to the people that work in these agencies. And even if we don't see it immediately, it's over time as a lot of the old heads leave and get replaced, and then a lot of the newer people come in with different opinions. They don't want to do the same thing that the old heads were doing. Because if you know any office politics, you know that there's probably some disagreement between old and new heads because they're like, why are you doing the same thing you've always done? This isn't the 1980s or 70s anymore. Let me try the new thing. People want their own projects to call their own. And along with that, it's people in these agencies do watch and do eventually get news of these things that we talk about. And even though I don't know necessarily that someone has seen my video in a DOT, I can see some talking points echoed in a bullet point that they put out in like a press release or something that like we've been pushing for a while. And it's nice to just see that reciprocated somewhere else. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
And I genuinely think that online urbanist video advocacy has had a pretty profound effect. I've talked to, I would say actually the majority of urbanists I've spoken to, when I've heard their origin story, it's because of online videos. And That has been kind of shocking to me, and in a way I haven't seen paralleled in other realms of life, people sort of getting into this real-world advocacy topic through online video, but it's had a pretty profound effect.
Yeah, I think it's online video, and then sometimes it depends on the platform someone is most on. Like, if it's something like a microblog like Twitter or something like that, or if it's like Instagram, oftentimes it's like maybe like posts about like specific factoids about highway projects, or it's like two pictures comparing like, here's a European city, here's an American city, why is it like that? And then like, maybe it's not necessarily video, but they eventually end up on the videos because they'll see something like a post like that and be like, I never thought about that. And then they eventually, maybe they don't look it up immediately, but they maybe see a post like that again somewhere else. And then they eventually, after like seeing or being exposed to one or two posts or seeing maybe even a joke about like the one more lane thing people really seem to resonate with.
I swear, bro, just let me build one more lane. I swear we're gonna fix traffic. Just build one more lane. Just let me build one more lane. Just let me build one more lane. I swear we're gonna fix traffic. Just one more lane and just make it bigger. Just make it bigger. We're gonna fix traffic.
They eventually see that and they're like, yeah, that's kind of true. And then they eventually start digging into the other stuff. And then that's how you sort of accidentally get people into advocacy, is that you make them care about this stuff and you make them realize like, hey, this has real physical effects on like your life and the people around you.
Mm-hmm. And the infrastructure words are kind of boring. Bond, RFP, alternatives analysis, right? Like it, and in some ways it's like the bureaucratese of it all is sort of anti-public. And so then like when you can just do one video, and sure you made a bunch of jokes and stuff like that, but not you specific, but anybody who's making content, you make a bunch of jokes and stuff, and then you just actually get that word into somebody's head, like that they have to do an environmental impact statement, and that like in that impact statement they have to have like 2 required public hearings, right? Like whatever the rule then is that you did sneak into there, the next time somebody encounters that, when they like see a sign posted on a building that says that there's going to be a public hearing on X, Y, or Z, they think, well, I know what that is now. Like not just this is boring and it doesn't have this. Can we talk a little bit about Denver specifically?
I'd love to.
Okay. You put out a very good video that then I think a lot of people in town were like, ouch. The one about Denver and RTD and the land use around stations. So I just wanted to ask, because you've been in town for a couple more days, and it's been a couple, I guess maybe a year and a half.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, like since that video. What do you think?
Well, it's been interesting because obviously I haven't had a lot of time here to just explore in general because I was here for a work trip, but specifically riding the A line in, it's very obvious that certain spots have changed a lot. I think one of the stops that I remember filming at 2 years ago was Central Park. And I remember that just being like a barren parking lot wasteland. And now at least I saw a few new buildings there when I was there. And then the stop, I think, is it 38th before Union?
Yeah, 38th and Blake. Yeah.
30th and Blake I also filmed at. And that one, there's a ton of new stuff around. Or at least some of the buildings that I remember seeing starting are completed now.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's seeing stuff like that, it's really reassuring. And it's like probably in like 5 years or 6 years, a lot of the ridership issues will be solved. Now, there is still, and I would have to look this up, the second furthest south station on the system and the light rail, there is a barren field with a station in it.
Yeah.
And
this is like Lone Tree City, I think, or something like that. Yeah.
And that's a good example of like, that needs to be remedied pretty quickly, because obviously you need new housing and you have a station in the middle of a field that looks like GM flat grass. And it's like, you should probably build stuff there. And so we should celebrate the things that are getting better, but also, why is this still like this? And some of the things, in my opinion, are justified in that, like, hey, you need to fix a lot of the land use problems. And that's like a legitimate policy problem, developer problem. But then there's other things that, like, I think do deserve criticism, like some of the bus frequencies. Like, there was definitely one bus I wanted to ride in. I'm staying up in Highland, what is it? Forgetting the name. But there's one bus that I was trying to get downtown with, and I was like, oh, okay, no problem. I'll catch that. After this one goes by in 5 minutes, I'll get the next one. And then it went by, and I looked at the transit app again. I was like, oh, this is now an hourly frequency.
Well,
yeah. Those are the things. Even if that was like a 20 or 30 minute frequency instead of hourly, that would be huge for people.
Yeah.
Because it's like hourly is you have to plan your entire schedule around it, versus like 20, 30 minutes. At least me staying here, I can be like, oh, I'll just get the next one in 20 or whatever. Like, I'm not the person that's like, you have to be perfectionist, like everything needs to be 10-minute frequencies, which would be great. It's reasonably you can't do that for various reasons, but at least getting stuff down to 20 and 30 minutes for everything, you can at least be like, oh, okay, I'll just leave in 20 minutes or whatever, or 30 minutes. But yeah, so I think there's certain aspects that I know RM Transit or Reese, which we all love his content stuff. But at the same time, I think he put out a really weird video recently where he was just kind of bashing RTD in general. And I think the thing that's like tough for me as an advocate is that you have to remember how far places have gotten to this point in the first place. Because like Denver has really only had nicer rail transit in the last 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, we opened the G line in 2019. We opened the N line in 2020.
Yeah. And so it's a pretty new system. And like, in my opinion, it doesn't deserve as much criticism as like some of the other creators or advocates have said, because it's like, you have an entirely electrified regional rail system, which is one of only 2 in the country that are fully electrified, the other being Philly. And so that's unique. Granted, probably running diesel services further away is probably a smart idea for now, but just having that ability in the first place is really unique. And I think that should be more celebrated and talked about than it is. Mm-hmm. And you can also say, if a Canadian YouTuber calls RTD out in any way, you can say, well, I don't think you can have anywhere to talk. Canada has 0 miles of mainline electrified rail. So, I would chill out a bit.
We're going to leave a comment on his video right now.
No. But I thought, it was interesting because your video, you said specifically the land use. Hey, let's talk about land use. The land use is bad. And it is. Yeah. But that's the thing that I feel the most confident about. Like, I can tell you... Yes. Evans Station, Broadway Station, you go down to Bellevue Station, along the G line at Old Town Arvada, along the W line here at Sheridan. I mean, like, there are so many bubbles of TOD. RTD on their website has like a little presentation where you can like flip through all of the TOD that they sort of take credit for with their stations. Yeah. And like the dollar figure is insane. It's like billions and billions of dollars of like real estate development and new homes. And now there's like a political movement here in Colorado. We just passed a law last year that requires, I was at the bill signing that the governor's office invited me to. It was very cool. For this bill signing of like transit-oriented communities, like new, land use has to be implemented around like rail stops. Yeah. That feedback is there. Now it's the service. It really is the service. And that's the part I think is really, that takes a huge bit of pressure. It obviously takes a lot of money. And like that's the part that I feel less optimistic for. We have new money. We passed, that also happened last year. There was like a press reported as like a grand deal, but that like makes it sound like less good than it is. They put a fee on oil and gas production, and Colorado produces a lot of oil and gas, and said that fee will go towards transit and a little bit towards Colorado Parks and Wildlife. That's great. Right? Like we are like saying, okay, the negative externality, let's price that and let's go ahead and then spend that money on something that would get people to use less of the thing that we are putting a fee on. That's great. I don't know if that's going to get us to the 15-minute frequencies, but that's like where the conversation absolutely needs to be. And then Reese's kind of video was interesting because it was like, oh, the frequency's bad. And that's true. But like now the rail's useless then. And it's like, well, no. It's actually created new homes in new places and like new communities. I would say like the rail has been very beneficial, but maybe not well used. Like I would agree to that.
I think 2 things is that building a rail right-of-way and system in the first place is incredibly hard. Yeah. And it doesn't even matter if the train is okay at the moment. It matters that it exists because oftentimes it's like it is hard to get a service started up from scratch or a new line started up from scratch. And if you even have the line there in the first place, it makes the option of running more trains or extending a line so much easier because you can then justify that very easily. And so we're trying to do a similar thing in Philly where we have like a project called Reimagining Regional Rail, a very tongue twister. But the thing is we want to get down to 30 or 15-minute frequencies on most of the lines. And some of our lines are really long. And so there's a lot of challenges with that. But it's the fact that our system exists in the first place that we can even think about this. Yeah. And I think that, in my opinion, getting the infrastructure stuff right in the first place and then focusing on the externalities later is much more important than just saying this train is not successful because it's not running frequently enough. In Philadelphia, we had a project that was built in the 80s called the Center City Commuter Connection. Again, another tongue twister. And essentially what it did was we had 2 terminal stations that were part of our regional rail network, and they made a tunnel between the 2 terminal stations. And so now the trains can run through the entire system. Back when that was built, they never increased the frequencies. The frequencies were still 30 minutes to an hour on most lines. So it was like they built this entire infrastructure, and someone could say like, well, that didn't really improve anything. But at the same time, that piece of infrastructure is incredibly useful, and we can increase service frequencies now, and this tunnel would have never gotten built in the current day. Someone had the foresight to do that back in the day, and we can thank them for that. And so people in the future, when you do have good frequencies here in Denver, someone will thank you because you had the train there in the first place to even do this. So that's like the thing that I think a lot of advocates need to at least pat them. That people just need to be nicer to themselves because like this stuff is hard to do.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of people that are advocates, or generally leftists in general, that can never celebrate wins because they always move on to the next thing they have to do. And I often say that like, no, it's okay. You don't have the Paris RER frequencies, but you have the train. And it's only been there for 10 years. Like, that's impressive on itself.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to celebrate the wins more. And honestly, that does help with advocacy when you celebrate wins, because then the average person is like, why are they so excited about this?
Yeah.
And then they kind of will get more invested in it. So it's another way of sort of doing PR for yourself, I guess. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think we have a lot of wins to celebrate here in Denver. Like you said, we've got the rail lines, the sidewalk ordinance passed a couple years ago. There's a lot of good stuff happening in our city.
I'm optimistic too. We talked a little bit about this last night, but like there is real desire for more. I'm going to use regional rail, but that's maybe not the right word. Like intercity rail.
Yes.
Like there is very strong desire and a very, very like hardworking group of people that actually think that this can get done.
Yeah.
And I think probably an appetite from voters to like fund it with a tax increase. You know, people were feeling really optimistic about that in 24. I actually think in some ways, like the national election, now that we can see that there's a crazy person in charge and this is a very blue state, people then kind of look and say, well, I guess we're going to have to do it ourselves.
Right.
Yeah.
But like we did it ourselves 150 years ago and created like, you know, a city and a place here, right? By like funding a rail expansion ourselves. We can do it again now, I think. I'm optimistic that then in 30 years, people are going to be like, oh yeah, well like, you know, the bench design at the like Fort Collins stop on the Front Range passenger rail is not very good. So, you know, we need to work on that. Like I would love for them to do that small bore work.
Like I wish that was the issue.
Right. Yeah.
Regarding the federal politics of stuff. It's like people see this as like a really big blow to everything. And yeah, in certain ways it is. But also at the same time, I have seen normal friends that do not give a shit about this stuff retweeting or like posting Instagram stories about like me being a girl in like a walkable city and how I'm depressed when I come back to my like normal one. 5-6 years ago, you never saw anyone posting anything about that, and let alone a normal person that does not care about this stuff.
Yeah.
So the fact that it's like a meme in general nomenclature and culture is the fact that like we've succeeded. And I don't see this ever reversing now. Because people are always continuously questioning now, why don't we have the things that other people have, or why is my neighborhood the way it is? And it's one of those things where, yeah, you will get some idiots in office that are generally trying to stub end or get in the way of these things, but I don't think they're going to last that long. And I think they're a dying breed of older generations that really believed in like later, middle 19th century like housing development patterns that aren't going to continue very far into the future. Because I think a lot of the younger generations, even if they're not super vocal about it, they at least know that these are issues and like ask, why is everything like in the suburbs the way it is? This kind of sucks. I am very hopeful for the future, even if we have roadblocks like the federal government being the way it is or going to be, because I think that like the culture in general is changing and you can't really stop that at some point.
100%.
Yeah, totally agree. I think there's a sea change coming, and I appreciate all the work you are doing to be a part of that sea change, and hopefully we are a part of that as well. Alan, it's been so great having you on the podcast. Thanks for coming to Denver. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, and hopefully I'll be back sometime when I don't have a work trip and can see more things.
Yeah, it's a beautiful city. It's a little cold right now, but come back and experience it. It's really nice. The Denver Urbanism podcast is a production of longtime blog Denver Infill and sister blog Denver Urbanism. You can get engaged in the conversation and learn more at denverurbanism.com. Thanks very much.
start an OnlyFans.
Oh no. Oh no.
That will,
Content creator.
in the media empire of Alan Fisher.
You got to make the faceless one first.
Ah, okay, yeah.
Oh no.